meeting was taking place. Gathered in the garden of one of the town's wealthiest residents, a gang of sharp-dressed businessmen feasted on several £100s of steak. This unusual group attracted attention, and the local cops looked on astonished. What they didn't know was that they were witnessing a summit meeting of the entire leadership of the American Mafia. In fact, until that moment, many denied the Mafia even existed. Sure, there was crime, but organized crime, a criminal gang with secret initiation rites and codes enforced by sentence of death, seemed like something out of the movies. Across the Atlantic in Sicily, things were much the same. Here, in the birthplace of the Mafia, its influence reached into every corner of life. Yet its very existence was often denied. Secrecy and internal discipline gave the Mafia its power, and this power was about to go global. 1957 marked the moment the American and Sicilian mafias became international, forming a billion-dollar crime corporation. It was a turning point in another way, too. It signaled the start of a war against organized crime that would last almost half a century. A war that forced both the US and Italy, finally, to confront the terrifying criminal conspiracy in their midst. The United States in the mid-1950s. The good times were here. The country had emerged from depression and World War with a booming economy. For many ordinary men and women, the American dream had become a reality. But something else was booming too: the Mafia. For those growing up in a family associated with the mob, it was as if the outside world barely existed, apart from being a source of easy money. The Mafia is organized in groups called families. The head of the family is known as the boss, or the godfather. And the longest-serving New York boss of all time was Joe Bonanno, known as Joe Bananas. He ran the Bonanno family from the early 1930s until the mid-1960s. Bonanno's power was founded on the influence he wielded over his community in New York. His son, Bill, saw firsthand how his father operated, and himself became a leading gangster with the Bonanno family.
My father would, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, would go into this hall and sit in an office in the back, and various people from the neighborhood would come in and ask favors. Somebody had a sick child, and she couldn't pay the doctor, and my father would arrange for that. Somebody else had a husband who was cheating on her, and she wanted to know what to do. He would take care of that. That happened twice a week. So when that happens, you begin to form the ideas that when you have a problem, you know where to go.
This is home movie footage, shot in Brooklyn in 1957. It looks like any ordinary American family, enjoying the new prosperity. But looks can be deceiving. Dominic Montilio was born into a mob family in New York. Some of his relatives were senior mobsters in the Gambino crime family, another of America's leading mafia families. Montilio was aware from an early age how his relatives were unlike others in the neighborhood.
I grew up in a very traditional mob family, and it was a very different kind of life than my other friends had. You know, I noticed that from the beginning, because there was times when, well, the FBI would break down the door because, I mean, we lived in the same house with my uncle, and he was very connected.
Montiglio's uncle was an up-and-coming gangster called Nino Gaggi. One day when he was 11, Dominic ran home, bursting to tell his uncle Nino that he had been elected class president at school.
I came home all excited because I had the button, you know, it said president on it. And he said, oh, great. He says, what does the class president do? So I said, you know, teacher goes out of the room and you watch the class. If anybody does anything wrong, you write their name on the board. And he looked at me and he says, you're telling me you're a rat, you're a stool pigeon. So I said, you know, I mean, 10 years old, 11 years old, what are you going to say? And he said, well, tomorrow you got to go back and give that button back to the teacher and tell her you can't be the class president.
Il Bonanno and Dominic Montiglio both grew up in a world closed to the outside. The American mafia called itself Cosa Nostra, our thing. But this was a world imported to America from several thousand miles away. This is where the mafia came from. Sicily, the largest island in the Mediterranean, with a population of 5 million, less than 2 miles from the Italian mainland. Like Montiglio, Leoluca Orlando was born in 1947, in Palermo, Sicily's biggest city. Unlike Montiglio, he would grow up to fight the mafia, not join it.
Sicily is a land of contradictions. Palermo is the capital of Sicily, is the capital of the mafia too. Is the capital of the history, is the capital of the shame of this land.
In the Sicilian dialect, mafioso once meant bold or beautiful. From the 1860s, it became the name associated with the island's criminal element, who were often organized into families of men related by blood or marriage. But their existence was steeped in secrecy. Even discussing the mafia was taboo, as Orlando found one day at school.
When I was 14 years old, 15 years old, I organized with other students a seminar about the mafia and against the mafia. The director, the Jesuit director of the school, called my parents and said, it is a scandal. Why Lucchetto is speaking about the mafia? We have nothing to do with the mafia, therefore we are not speaking about the mafia. Gray area, not seeing, not speaking, not hearing. It was Sicily when I was a young student.
Joe Bonanno grew up in this world. He was a native Sicilian, born here in the pretty seaside town of Castellammare del Golfo in 1905. He only moved to America in the 1920s.
Sicily has a long history of mistrust of authority. There's an old saying back there that to know a man, you have to know his father, and his father before him, and his father before him. And once that happens, there is very little room for betrayal.
Much of the power of the mafia derived from its ruthless discipline. Chief among these values was omertà, the vow of silence. In Sicily, all mafiosi had to take a sacred blood oath that they would never betray the organization to the authorities, and that they would always carry out the orders of their mob bosses. The novice was sworn in through a quasi-religious ceremony and became a so-called man of honor. The American mafia followed exactly the same traditional initiation ceremony.
You're brought into a room and you're given the image of a saint. Prick your finger, enough to draw a drop or two of blood, put it on the image of the saint, put the saint in your hand, and they light it. And you take an oath, and it simply says that you hope to burn as this saint is burning if you betray your brothers.
To break this oath would mean death.
Our culture taught us to act like men. And acting like men meant keeping your mouth shut.
But for Bonanno and his fellow gangsters, omertà was more than just a vow of silence.
Omertà comes from the root manly, and it simply means to act like a man. And a man doesn't get somebody else into trouble. Therefore, he doesn't say, John did it. Who hit you in the face? John hit me in the face. A man will see to it that John gets hit in the face.
Early in the 20th century, a young man was growing up in Sicily who would change the face of crime. Salvatore Lucania, born in 1897, would become infamous as Charlie Lucky Luciano, the father of the modern American mafia. His hometown of La Cara Fridi was built on the hard and dangerous work of sulfur mining. Sulfur mines were primitive places where temperatures were so high, men would work naked. Yet these deprived laborers still had to pay the mafia for the right to work. They were not alone. The owner of the mine would have paid up too. The mafia squeezed money from all walks of Sicilian life. When he was 10, Luciano was one of hundreds of thousands of Sicilians who left the poverty of the islands behind and set sail for a new life in America. He soon drifted into crime. As a teenager, Luciano joined the notorious 5 Points gang, which also boasted Al Capone as a member. It was the age of prohibition. For 13 years, it was illegal to make or sell alcohol in the United States. Luciano and other bootleggers made millions supplying Americans with as much booze as they wanted. Salvatore Lucania started calling himself Charles Luciano. He gained the nickname Lucky and the scars on his neck when he miraculously survived a knife attack and beating. He presided over his criminal kingdom from a suite in New York's luxurious Waldorf Hotel. Here, he called himself Mr. Charles Ross. And he made it to the very top in 1932 with the killing of Salvatore Maranzano, then the most powerful boss in America. But the constant battles were getting in the way of business.
If there were 3 Italian mobsters in the Italian neighborhood, it was an almost certain guarantee that at least 2 of them were going to try to kill the 3rd. And the 3rd was plotting against the other 2. So bodies would wind up in the streets. To what purpose?
Luciano wanted the mafia families to bury their differences, not each other.
We can't make money with guns in our hand, was his expression, the expression that I heard over and over again. We can't make money with guns in our hand.
His solution was to set up a body called a commission, a mafia board of directors made up of the bosses of the 5 New York families, plus those of Chicago and Buffalo. Any boss with a grievance against another family could bring it to the commission. But for the plan to succeed, Luciano had to win the support of the other families, including Joe Bonanno, who had just taken over from Maranzano, the man whose killing Luciano had set up.
Because you got to remember, Luciano was an Americanized guy, so he talked that way. My dad always told me that Luciano talked just like those Americans. And he says, those guys are dead. I have no quarrel with you, and I know you don't have a quarrel with me. Therefore, past is the past, let's go on.
Joe Bonanno backed Luciano's plan and joined him on the first commission alongside Al Capone.
Luciano's conception was that he would meld Sicilian mafia mores, which formed a very tight organization with American business methods. That's basically what he came up with, a kind of amalgam that we came to know as American mafia organized crime.